This is Gerardo Del Real with Resource Stock Digest. Joining me today is the president and CEO of Midas Gold, Mr. Stephen Quin. Stephen, how are you today?
Good, Gerardo, and back in Vancouver finally.
I know it's been a busy several weeks for you. You were at BMO. You were also at PDAC. Before we talk about what looks like gold headed towards 1,700 and the state of the markets, let's talk about what your feedback and your thoughts as to the climate of both of those conferences were. I mean, the bottom line is everybody's dealing with this coronavirus scare. Did that affect attendance at either conference?
I would say much less so at BMO. I mean, there was a notable lack of people from Asia, and a lot of those people chose or weren't able to come. So there was a reduction from that point of view. But the attendance was good, but the sort of balance of meetings for companies like a Midas, shifts year on year, and you can almost sort of read the sentiment of the market by the nature of the meetings you have. So, we saw a much higher interest in number of meetings with corporates, other companies, just getting updates on what's happening with the project, et cetera, and wanting to make sure they got their finger on the pulse. Less from resource funds because they're just not getting money in the door, and they're really kind of, because of the volatility in the market, much more focused on the larger liquid producer type stocks that are benefiting from the higher gold price today. And so, that sort of shift in priorities, and then higher interest from private equity type groups. Those, they're all in the bargain hunting mode again, looking for opportunities.
Excellent. And I know that during BMO, I think that coincided with the large quarantine out of China. So that makes all the sense in the world. Tell me a bit about PDAC, and then let's talk about this financing. I joked with you privately that had you announced the $35 million private placement the week before liquidity kind of dried up, I probably would not have been as big a fan of it. And then, with the fears surrounding coronavirus and liquidity drying up, I thought it was a brilliant move that pretty much guarantees that you make it across the finish line. And we'll talk about that in a second, and the support from Paulson and his group there. But let's talk PDAC a bit. How was that?
PDAC was more subdued because, jumping back to the BMO conference, of course, Sunday night, Monday were great. Gold was headed to 1680, and everybody thought, okay, the party's on. And then by Tuesday, Wednesday, definitely sagged off a bit, and that trend, continued into PDAC, which was from Sunday just past till yesterday. And what you definitely noticed at PDAC as attendance was down. I think it's about 10% from last year. There were a number of empty booths, not a huge number, but, scattering here and there where people just didn't come at all. And just going around to all the events, and even at the conference, there's a lot of sort of taking sensible precautions, sort of avoiding the handshakes, and lots of hand sanitizer on everybody's tables, and people taking precautions. Because you look at PDAC, I think there was 90 countries represented, with people from 90 different countries. I mean, if there was a place to spread coronavirus around the world, PDAC would be it, because people wandering around shaking each other's hands, and 20,000 people heading to 90 different countries. It would spread very rapidly. So, people were being sensible.
Let's talk about the news from February the 27th. You announced a financing, $35 million US, a hefty amount considering the climate and the insecurity around the global economy. Big vote of support from Paulson and company. Can we talk about that a bit, and what you're going to use the money for?
Sure. So, the challenge of the permitting process being extended, which we announced back in January, is that essentially it costs more money to complete the task. And our sort of thinking had been, with the draft EIS scheduled to come out in January, there's a good positive development that would provide a platform to do an equity financing, and we're sort of essentially getting all the preparation to potentially do something late January into February when the draft EIS came out, launching off good news. The delay in the permitting process that we announced at the end of January kind of cut the legs off from that strategy. And, people get cautious, nervous, there's another delay, maybe I won't invest. So the sort of interest faded from the equity side. There was definitely interest, but it would have been, call it expensive financing, significant discount, half warrant, and investors may love that kind of thing, but companies don't because of the dilution impact. And if you look at the financings that have been done this year, they've been very much of that kind of nature. Sizable discount, warrants attached, various things like that.
Sure.
So we, as a board, had discussions about the options, and you really kind of had three. You could have severely cut back your expenditures, but that would just extend the permitting time frame and end up costing you more. So it's not really, a positive solution. And to do some equity, which is obviously comes with less strings attached. Yes, you dilute, but there's it's different to convertible notes. And then we were sort of heading down that path, and then Paulson and Co. Came forward with a convertible note financing that's similar to the one we did with them in 2016. The only real difference is it's priced differently at a higher price than we did in 2016. And basically just said, look, we're prepared to put a more comprehensive solution on the table, given volatility, uncertainty of the markets, uncertainty of the time frame. You need to go into this or continue this process, from a position of strength, dealing with the regulators, knowing you've got the money to keep pushing things forward. And so that triggered a review by our independent directors, and then an independent committee was set up because Paulson, has two directors on our board. So they were excluded from all discussions, negotiations, evaluations of different options, and things like that. And the independent committee came back to the independent directors, the non-Paulson directors, and said, in light of circumstances, this is the best option to provide the certainty to move forward. Back to your comment earlier, we are fortunate that all of that process and all the independent committee, and they had an independent financial advisor, got finished over the weekend, and we announced on the Monday morning. We agreed to everything on the Monday morning, but the nature of this financing is such that you have to pre-file with the TSX,
right.
Toronto Stock Exchange, before you can announce the transaction. And so that process took a couple of days. But, if you look at it, a week later, that discussion would probably have been very different. Because, the volatility of the market and, shares falling out of bed, especially on the Friday for the mining sector. And, so it's, timing, it's a common expression, it's better to be lucky than smart. And I think we were just very fortunate in our timing, and we were very fortunate to have this, support of Paulson and their willingness to, put their balance sheet on the line to, support the project.
Well, given the amount of gold and the antimony credit that the project boasts, I think that, as far as Paulson goes, it's probably, if you're going to be a contrarian investor, which Mr. Paulson is, I can't think of a better deposit to sink a large chunk of capital into. It's in a great jurisdiction. You're far along the permitting process. Will this get you across the finish line?
It certainly should. I mean, essentially the why the 35 US million was essentially to take us through the permitting process and beyond. So, um, it it sort of allows, well, what if the permitting process takes, there's another extension, which we don't expect, and certainly we're doing everything possible to avoid, but what if? And we don't, the challenge of uncertainty is we don't control the schedule, we don't control what happens. So this provided some certainty to carry us through to the end of 2021. And while we don't know the updated schedule yet, it's advancing, but there's a bunch of moving pieces on the schedule for permitting. We would anticipate, decision coming out in the first half of 21. And, that's definitely what we're striving for. And this would take us to the financing would take us to the end of 21. So, it was sort of what we needed plus a bit. And that puts us in a much more confident position to push the regulators, to get on with it, get it done. We have the financial resources to complete the process, et cetera.
Excellent. Stephen, anything else that you'd like to add? I know that you're busy behind the scenes, holding local meetings and speaking with, both sides of the aisle. Anything that you want to add to the news or moving forward here as far as Midas goes?
Well, I think to be, 100% clear, the delay is disappointing. We believed we were heading in a good direction for most of the latter part of last year. But the key to a successful permitting process is getting the document right. And so while there was, you could argue an opportunity to publish a draft EIS and get it out the door, if that document was flawed, the risk is much higher to see a substantial extension, a supplemental process, or a major setback. And so we and the regulator accept that the document that was prepared was just not good enough to go out, and it needed improvement to get a valid process completed with the public.
Well, you got to check the boxes off. In the meantime, you have gold trading at 1668. I think that, and I've said this before, I think that that permit is going to be delivered at a pretty opportune time as it relates to the price of gold and what that's going to do to the inputs as far as those 6.6 million ounces of gold, at the very least, that exist at Stibnite. Thank you, Stephen, for the update. I look forward to chatting with you again as updates come in, and I know that you're eagerly expecting those, as is everyone else.
Great. Thanks, Gerardo, and always thanks for your interest.
Absolutely. Appreciate the time, Stephen. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.